My name's Amanda DeFonte. I'm our Senior Manager of Virtual Events here at Bonterra, and I will be your moderator today. Joining you live from Washington, D.C. Please feel free to write in the chat where you're joining from, your organization. We always love to see kind of where in the world folks are coming from and what great organizations we get to support today. So please put that in the chat. While we are introducing ourselves and while y'all do that, I wanted to cover a couple of quick housekeeping notes. First and foremost, that chat is going to be available to you throughout the entirety of today's presentation. So feel free to engage with one another there, engage with us. We love to kind of make this as two-way as possible, so we're not all just talking at you. But I ask that you please put your questions for our wonderful speaker or for me in the Q&A section. As you can see, the chat starts to flow, and we don't want your really important questions to get lost. So please put that in the Q&A section. We will do our best to get to as many questions as we can at the end here. So there's my housekeeping notes. And before we jump into the star of today's show, I did want to quickly introduce any new attendees here to Bonterra. If you're not familiar with us, Bonterra makes software for the greatest social good, propelling you and your mission to its peaked impact. We want to help you raise more, match more, grant more, help more, and really do more good. We've brought together the powers of Network for Good, Every Action, Cyber Grants, WeSpire, Social Solutions, Salsa, and more to help you achieve your greatest good. So I'll give you kind of a quick snapshot of who we are to kind of digest all of the kind of powers that be in one spot. So if you're interested in learning more about our tools, I'm going to put a quick poll on the screen. Feel free to fill that out. We'd love to chat with you. We'd love to get an understanding of some of your efforts, maybe some of the gaps, some of the challenges you're facing, and see if we might be able to help you either through our tools or some of our additional resources. So I'll leave that up for a moment for everyone while I introduce the star of today's show. We are fortunate enough to be joined by Alyssa Wright, the founder and principal of Wright Collective, and superstar webinar speaker of Bonterra and longtime partner of mine and ours, and one of my favorite presenters ever. And I know I say it every time, but it's because it's true. Having spent time as a human rights activist in Eastern Europe and Africa, Alyssa brings over a decade of experience in international philanthropy to Wright Collective. As an accomplished facilitator, consultant, and coach, she builds new revenue streams, shifts cultural perspectives, and inspires people to believe that change is possible no matter what. She's helped hundreds of both domestic and global social organizations successfully launch major gifts programs, capital campaigns, and create sustainable funding models that result in, resource flows, time back in your day, all of those really valuable things to keep your organization moving. And everyone that's worked with Alyssa knows that she is a true partner, myself included, and a powerful millennial voice in the social change movement. So Alyssa, thank you so much for being here. It's always a pleasure, and I will take my back seat and let you take it away and run this show.
Thank you, Amanda. You're always so kind to me. I really appreciate it. And so great to be back in the Bonterra community and be with you all today. Thank you all 330 folks that are joining in. And I appreciate you all not only taking this time to learn something new for yourself and your organization, but also taking some time to understand what's going on in the landscape. So I'll share a little bit of, as we're talking about reaching and recruiting new supporters and donors to give to your work. Talk a little bit too about what we're predicting this year, because it's an interesting year. We're 4 years out from the pandemic. We're in a federal election year. So all of you who are raising, as I saw in the chat, from Ohio to my home state of Maine, hello, Mainers, to California, to Illinois, thank you all just for being here and for thinking really intentionally about how we mobilize resources around the causes we care about. So with that, I will share my screen and get us started. So today's topic, when Amanda and I were talking, was really crafted with two hopes in mind. One is Many of us know when a year is noisy, which a federal election year is very noisy. There's a couple of things we're seeing on social media and on CNN and whatnot. Um, it's really important that you're getting your message out and you're being direct and authentic and true to who you are, because there's a lot of noise and you got to break through it to talk about what's unique about your organization, what your impact is in the world, and also what your true needs are. Because again, there are so many organizations and even the political giving we're going to see this year. Everybody is looking for money and for resources and access to them. So it's really important that you know not only your own authentic voice, but some authentic ways to reach and recruit new supporters. And also, you're creating realistic benchmarks for ourselves. My really good colleague and friend, Radha Friedman, just wrote a book on fundraising without burnout. And is that possible? And her book beautifully articulates what I think so many of us in the fund development sector feel, which is we set really high, unrealistic expectations for ourselves, where people think, oh, it's so easy to fundraise. And it's not. It's an intentional, strategic process that requires not only intentional relationship building, but intentional relationships to things like technology as well, which is why I'm always excited to partner with Bonterra on these presentations, because we have to make sure that all of the vehicles we're using to be in relationship to folks feel authentic and support us in doing the thing that's most important, which is spending time with our community, understanding their needs and helping them resource it. So today comes from a place of talking a little bit about what's authentic and realistic for you and your organization, but also what are some of the trends that we're seeing in how organizations very similar to yours participating today, which might have a small development shop. I would be surprised if anyone in the chat wants to share if you have more than 10 people on your development team. I doubt it, right? I think you're all pretty small to mid-sized organizations. Um, and so how are you effective in making sure that you're recruiting and bringing in new supporters when you are wearing a lot of hats? So we'll talk a little bit about that today as we move through this, and then I'm excited to have some Q&A. And so again, feel free to add those questions ongoing to the Q&A function here in the Zoom room. So the first thing I kind of wanted to start with today is, I think it's always important to root ourselves in why we're doing what we're doing or why we're creating a strategy or an initiative. And then also, well, we'll pivot after that to talking about your authentic voice as an organization. What do you want to say about your work and how do you want to say it this year? We'll talk about some ideas of where to find new supporters. I'll share a case study with you all. And then we'll talk a little bit about creating a springtime action plan that feels really doable if you're a 1 to 5 person development operation. Every time I do these sessions, I really like to root us in getting away from that scarcity mindset that pervades the nonprofit sector. So just want to make sure that all of you today tuning in, remember to root yourself from a place of sufficiency and abundance. Yes, it's a noisy, crowded landscape, but if you're not out there making decisions from a place of there is enough and I am enough and we are worthy, you're never going to grow your organization in the right direction that it's meant to grow in, particularly around fund development. So, if you're coming to today's call and, you're at an organization right now where there's a lot of, we can't do that, we shouldn't, there's a lack of trying, there's no growth mindset. Um, there's a lot of shutting down ideas instead of saying, hey, let's give this a shot. I think it's really important to think about, this year, you got to do some of the tried and true things and be consistent, but you also can't be so risk averse that you're not trying new things in a landscape that is constantly changing. If I've learned anything fundraising through the Ebola crisis in West Africa, Hurricane Sandy in fundraising around Hurricane Sandy in New Jersey and New Orleans after that crisis, fundraising during the COVID pandemic, fundraising with probably, I don't know, it's probably getting close to like 100 organizations at this point when they transitioned from being founder-led to first ED-led. In all those moments where there can be a lot of change and transition and tumult, it's really important that we root ourselves in a longer, bigger vision of our work. So as you're thinking about building a base of supporters and recruiting new supporters, it's not necessarily about getting 100 of them in the first 6 months. It's about getting 100 of them over the next 3 years who are going to be alongside you in the work for the next decade. So being really intentional with building a donor community and a base that's connected to who you are, your beliefs, your mission, your projected outcome, is so much more important than the transactionalness of, collecting quantity over quality in terms of the partnerships that you'll design. So some trends in philanthropy that make it really important to focus on new supporters this year. The first is from a major gift standpoint. So every organization has their own definition of major gifts. But from a major gift standpoint, so say 1,000 and up or 5,000 and up donors, we are seeing fewer donors and larger gifts. So again, as you're thinking about bringing new supporters in, if you bring in 3 new donors every year that give 5,000 or more, you're actually really winning in this landscape. It is tough with the fact that with income inequality, we're seeing a lot of donors who used to give sort of on the precipice of major giving level slide back as the middle class and upper middle class are hurting. And then we're also seeing a lot of donors who are high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals giving more and more significant amounts of resources. As someone who does a lot of capital campaign work, we just wrapped up a capital campaign where the top 80% of the funding that came in through that capital campaign was from the same 3 families and their ecosystems. The kind of the family and the companies and the things that surround them. So fewer donors and larger gifts is something we'll continue to see trend this year. The next is that the generational wealth transfer is underway. I've seen a lot of organizations as grandparents and parents sort of pass down wealth to the next generation, or they pass on and they leave behind legacies for their children or grandchildren to steward. That generational wealth transfer means that it opens up a whole new network around that generation of a family or a company for you to bring in and steward. I recently saw on a board of trustees for a family foundation, a pretty significant brand new board was built around the young leader in their 40s who took over from her father. And it's opened up a whole new community of supporters and leaders at that foundation who can not only help with that foundation to give more to this particular organization, but also all the different networks and resources and communities that surround those new individuals. So just be mindful that the generational wealth transfer is underway, and it's something to be thinking about if you don't already know the children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews of your existing donor base. Oh, it's a federal election year. I've fundraised through 4 or 5 of those now. It's always a tough year, and what the data shows us is that October to December is a tough time to fundraise. Not only is it noisy, but people are very engaged in political giving. If not throughout the entire year, they're very engaged from September leading up until the election. And it's really important also too to be mindful that most year-end appeals really struggle in a federal election year. So just be mindful of that because you might need to sign on a lot of your new supporters through different mechanisms before October or November 1st. A couple other trends to name is we are seeing more and more women donors stewarding investment and giving strategies as their wealth grows. Some of this is from the generational wealth transfer, and some of it is from women earning and accruing more of their own wealth. So there are a lot of giving circles, women's communities, women's affinity groups that are organizing and doing more philanthropically, and something for you to think about in terms of where you might want to present your messages. And how timely to share this during the week of International Women's Day on Friday and during Women's History Month. So something really great to think about for all the female identifying folks in your community. How might you potentially be able to bring them together into community and focus them in as new supporters? Funding at the intersections is much more prevalent. So again, I've seen a lot of organizations that used to just be focused on workforce development, but now are talking about race and able-bodiedness and thinking about the intersections with other movements like racial justice and gender justice and disability rights. And so we're seeing a lot of opportunities as you think about new supporters that you could build bridges to different issues or different themes within your work and invite people to fund what you're doing. So just another thing to think about as you're thinking about bringing in new supporters. We are predicted to see a continued decline in household giving to nonprofits. So again, middle class is hurting. A lot of spring and fall appeals struggle. We've suggested to a lot of organizations monthly sustainer programs. You're more likely to get somebody to give $5 a month for the full year than to give you $250 in December. So just something to be thinking about. We are also in the same trend of seeing more diversity in philanthropy. With women, we're seeing more and more donors of color organizing on behalf of their communities and getting involved in philanthropy. There's actually an amazing network called the Donors of Color Network that was launched several years ago, where donors of color are mobilizing for their communities and really at the forefront of some really emerging cool trends in philanthropy. They also, this community also tends to want to give back by way of conversation and different types of small gatherings. So again, just something to think about as you're thinking about the mechanisms and the engagement opportunities to bring in new supporters. Thankfully, philanthropy is no longer just the Bill Gates and Warren Buffetts of the world. There's a lot more diversity coming up our way. And then there's expanding definitions of philanthropy and philanthropist. So again, one of my favorite things I've seen over the last few years, and I'm actually seeing as I'm planning some fundraising events this year, is the number of young people who want to get involved in philanthropy. I think they are feeling the timeliness of what's happening in our society, socially, environmentally, economically, and they want to get involved and give back. They're having their own lived experiences earlier, and wanting to get involved in them intellectually and financially even earlier. And so really thinking, one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is, how do we engage young people as supporters more frequently? I recently read an article about a 17-year-old girl who launched her own fundraiser at her high school, raised over $50,000 for the organization, and then had a family member match it. And it was a six-figure gift to this one particular organization in her local community. So again, this expanding definition of philanthropy and philanthropist, we shouldn't be turning away new supporters or potential new supporters when we see that energy, passion, excitement. It's almost something that is more important, I think, in the current landscape for us to follow than whatever we see in a wealth screen. So as we get started, I wanted to call out a couple of things that over the years we've seen. One, a pretty low return on for small to mid-size organizations. Um, and also just a couple of things that I hear back from donors when they see this in your fundraising strategy, go, oh, I can't believe they're doing that. And it actually makes them feel like your fundraising culture or your fundraising strategy is very transactional or so sort of impersonal and uninspiring that it turns them off from giving, even if they've had a good giving experience from the organization. So I just wanted to name some tactics you might want to steer away from this year. One of the things that a lot of people ask us is, should we buy lists of names, addresses, and emails? We've done that over the years several times for some organizations, and the return is extremely low for what you pay. Unless you have a deep relationship already to a certain community or region and you're just trying to get the contact information, if you have no presence there whatsoever, it's really difficult to see a return from that. And I've actually had donors say to me, I never pay attention to something that comes in the mail that doesn't have a personal handwritten note on it, or isn't from an organization that I elected to sign up for their newsletter or go to their event in the past. So something to think about this year if you're thinking about buying lists or you have a board member or a donor suggesting that to you. It has not only a pretty minimal return, but it also comes across to other donors when they know that you're doing that activity as pretty inauthentic. The other thing is purely cold calling without really thinking about like what your message is and why there's a connection there. So I recently did a bunch of corporate outreach to a ton of companies that I did not know in an area that I did not know. And when I reached out to every single one of them, I took about 5 minutes to go on their website. And instead of being a cold call nonprofit calling up with a mission statement, I actually looked at the business and I called them up and I said, hey, I saw that you're a women-owned company and I'm also a women-owned company. I'm reaching out to other women-owned companies in the community because I think you'd really want to support this girl's education program right now and see that as an opportunity. Pure cold calls where you just call and say, hi, I, wanted to connect with you as a business in the community, run an animal shelter. Hope you care about dogs. No one pays attention to that. Right. Even if they care about dogs. So be really mindful of that. Think about, again, if you're going to do some cold calls or, outreach like that, make sure you actually take that 5 minutes to do some research and build a bridge so it's genuine while you're reaching out. The next is when an organization or an individual pretends to be someone or something they're not. So again, I won't get into the details of this, but I have worked with certain personalities within organizations that the second they get on the phone with me, I'm like, they're in this because they wanted to have the title CEO or a big salary, or they're trying to build a nonprofit, career, so to speak, versus it's their lived experience or it's their life's work, their purpose work to be in this organization. A lot of that is driven by story. When I see a lack of story or a lack of people sharing story, I often will be like, should they really be leading this movement or leading this particular organization? And do I want to invest in that leader as much as I want to invest in the outcomes of the nonprofit? So just think about who's sharing what messages in your fund development world. A really good example of this is someone recently said to me, if I hear one more gold level sponsor get up at an event and just because they're a company or the president of the bank talk about how much they care about nonprofits in the community and have some generic scripted talking points, I'm going to scream. And I stopped giving to those organizations because I know they basically bought that spot, right? So I think we're evolving beyond some of that to be more in relationship to what we're all actually doing, and thinking about like who are the right people to speak and the right messages to share. It's really important in a year again where people will immediately stop listening, stop participating, won't follow up with additional giving when they kind of feel that transactional uh, generic message piece. And then, excuse me, the last two things to think about this year, especially with the federal election year, and again, it being noisy and a lot of social and economic and environmental topics being top of mind for people in our communities, um, is are you bringing fear and false urgency to people, or are you bringing hope and a realistic sense of what we can accomplish together? So be really mindful of, even though sometimes it does have a return, I have had people reach out to me and say, I've gotten 3 emails about how horrible the maternal health crisis is in America. I want to know where hope lives at this point. I know that women are dying. I know there are high levels of complications. I know the healthcare system is failing mamas and babies, but like, what is the positive thing for me to invest in? So be really mindful of that. Like, make sure that you give people the data and the information, but framing it in a more hopeful way is really important. And then one of the things that I am already getting from many political fundraising campaigns and parties over the last couple of months, I'm sure many of you are too, to your cell phone and email and social media, is these, really intense, urgent messages. We all know that giving $5 in the next few minutes is not going to change the infrastructure of our country. We also know that giving $5 in the next few minutes is not going to allow you to rescue every animal in the community or ensure the next 10 years of environmental conservation can happen through your land trust or whatever it might be. So just be mindful that your messages are realistic. They can bring a healthy sense of urgency. But a lot of the things to steer away from as you're bringing in new supporters is a sense of, unless literally it is an earthquake, or it is a disaster or a crisis. So I want to honor that there are moments where you do have to bring that urgency. But if it's not that, be mindful and steer away from that, because that really makes donors feel like you're trying to just hit a fundraising goal or you're trying to bring in a financial amount of money that isn't necessarily equated to something that is going to completely fall apart or require recovery in the next few moments. So as you're trying to find your authentic voice, just a couple of kind of little, whoops, I'm clicking too fast. Just a couple of little pointers here, things for you to be thinking about. Um, Remember that part of this work is to really build community around giving. You want to create a donor culture, a donor community, and you want your voice to be authentic in that so that you get the right types of donors and not just donors, that you get donors who really understand your values, beliefs, and experiences as an organization. You also need to find your authentic voice as, ensuring that you know what your organization is good at. So I've actually sat down with a lot of executive leaders at organizations and say, what is the thing that your organization does really well that no one else in the region does? And they kind of stumble. Like, it is difficult for some of them to answer that question. So know what your organization is really good at and zero in on that within your communications this year. The other thing as you're seeking new supporters is be really aware that, like, again, authenticity means owning the things that we're bad at as much as the things that we're good at. So embracing your weaknesses and mistakes and welcoming in that you're a learning organization. I was putting this presentation together yesterday, and I just telling Amanda that I'm sitting here 36 weeks pregnant and my brain can't remember proper grammar. So if there's any grammatical mistakes in this today, like, I am a human being, working parent, doing a lot of things in the universe. But that's the theme of our March newsletter, right? Like, I'm reaching out to my own community and not saying everything's perfect and great. We're celebrating women for Women's History Month. Get involved with Right Collective. No, like, this has been a really tough month. We've got a lot going on. Here's some of the things that we're learning, and here's some of the things we're excited to share with you as we evolve into our next chapter. So just think about that kind of piece of your voice. One of my favorite emails I get from an executive director twice a year, I think she sends it out. It's called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And she sends out this email about what's working, what isn't, and what's really hard about running an organization. This might be the year where you launch something like that and talk about how difficult it is or the struggles that you're having so that people know the truth behind your work and there's no facade. And then the last two things that I think are really important this year is telling stories and being concise with how you're telling stories. In general, the attention span in digital communications for folks is 90 seconds these days. So people read literally your emails for 90 seconds. That means they're not reading paragraphs of text. That means they're not necessarily watching a 5, 7, 10-minute video. So think about how you're telling stories. We actually have a client who recently decided in their newsletter they're going to do a comic strip or a digital storytelling piece every newsletter that they send out. And they've shared those on social. And they've actually gotten new supporters and new subscribers to their newsletter who are following the digital storytelling piece and the comic strip series outside of going to a blog or heading to YouTube and watching lengthy videos. So think about how you're expressing emotions and telling stories this year in a way where when people do have that 60 to 90 seconds, you're really capturing them and giving them a clear understanding, again, of your values, beliefs, experiences, what your organization is good at, and what you're learning. And then the other thing to think about this year, and this is different for every organization, but think about how you're leveraging the current political climate to talk about your work. If you're supporting refugees and immigrants and asylum seekers, what is your role this year? What are you going to share and what are you going to say? I actually just became a monthly donor to an organization that is supporting refugees and immigrants in our community because I want to make sure that they feel well supported, because I know there's going to be a lot of conversations this year that don't treat that community with dignity, right? So I'm being really mindful sort of where I might want to put some of my resources in philanthropy in juxtaposition to my beliefs, values. And if they had never shared that piece of why it was so important to have extra donors this year, I never would have thought of that. So just think about your organization this year as a key player in shaping some of those narratives in our society. And also, this could help you attract a wider range of supporters. I actually have never given to this organization in the past because people told me it was just a bunch of lawyers doing stuff. And I was like, I don't really fund lawyers. Then I realized what the impact actually was of what they're doing around legal aid. I was like, holy cow, how have I not been a donor? So just think about that, because there might be some current conceptions of who your organization is and who you're serving that this year you could leverage the current political climate to really talk about more. All right. So here's a big question that I always get in a lot of the work that we do at Right Collective. Where and how do we find new supporters? Where are they? A couple of things that I think there's some very traditional mechanisms that totally work, right? So, looking at your current donor base and asking your current donor base to help bring in new supporters is always a tried and true, but it's also really difficult because a lot of your current supporters might be strapped or exhausted and have already done that, right? Like, they've already kind of helped you build a base to this point. You really need to go out and find new people in the community. Since 2020, and also, really truly the last couple of years, people have moved around a lot. So if your organization is, working in Washington State, people might have moved to Oregon, or, we've seen here in my home state of Maine, a lot of people from New York who have actually come up here to live more rural, suburban lifestyles since the pandemic. We have an influx of new people in our community. And so that's really important because people have moved around a lot since the pandemic. So a couple of ideas on where and how to find new supporters. The first two are really about positioning yourself in front of philanthropy and going where you've never gone before. So, for instance, our firm is currently running a few capital campaigns to help midwives open birth centers throughout the United States. And one of the things that we're learning is that, we could go to a bunch of the maternal health, nonprofit, social enterprise conferences, but maybe we should also go to the conferences in the financial sector and the real estate sector to build relationships to other constituents that care about seeing um, community infrastructure and new healthcare projects erupting in the community. So think about that. Go where you haven't gone before. If you're very traditionally going to a lot of the nonprofit philanthropy sort of circles, I'm not saying don't go to those for certain things, but be really mindful of targeting, new audiences. One place that I've actually found a lot of momentum for philanthropy in the last couple of years is in the real estate and finance sectors. So maybe register for those conferences for the first time and see what possibility exists there and what relationships you can build there. Um, Actually, fun anecdote. One of our clients that does affordable housing recently went to a real estate convening in New York and came back from it, but they work in Massachusetts, and they have about 5 people who are new major donors that they met at that event. So again, just thinking about new places and spaces to go and network, I think could be really helpful. The other thing is make sure you know what you want to say to philanthropy or what you've learned from being in philanthropy. I find a lot of development directors over the last few years, when they position themselves to talk about things in our movement like trust-based philanthropy or giving collaboratives or giving circles, or, if you have a particular, how to be a great racial justice funder or how to be a great funder on behalf of small nonprofits. Think about what you want to say to philanthropy and how you can position that message as much as you're pitching your organization's mission statement and impact. So again, you could apply to be a speaker at a philanthropy conference, or apply to do a workshop or design a panel at a upcoming impact investment convening at your community foundation. Don't be afraid to kind of cross over into some of those places and spaces, because they should be hearing from you. You're the ones doing the work on the ground once you get the resources. The other thing is, know what the new hotspots are in your town or your area. So, anytime a new brewery or restaurant or wellness center opens in my area, the first thing that I do is walk in and say, "Hey, are you interested in hosting a fundraiser? Or could we potentially, collaborate together to design something, some kind of event here in the community?" If everyone's going to the new CrossFit gym, or if everybody's going to the new brewery, think about how you can partner with those organizations that everyone is participating in and going to. The restaurant with the wait list 3 months out, right? Like, how do you partner with them in some capacity to get in front of new supporters? And then the last thing is consider collaborative events and gatherings. So a lot of what we've helped clients with over the last few years has been focused on solidarity fundraising, which is a term that basically means similar organizations around an issue, theme, movement choose to collaborate instead of compete around funding. So a very traditional sort of view on this might be you and 2 other nonprofits in the community, all working on affordable housing, apply for a multi-million-dollar grant together, and you're all going to co-implement and share the resources, right? So we kind of know about it on the institutional side, but also consider cross-pollinating networks to find new individual donors or new corporate champions. Hey, 2 environmental groups together into the community, let's design a tree planting day on Earth Day in partnership with this, together. And we'll get these 3 companies in the area to participate, and we can all share in the relationships and the resources raised. So think about joining forces with similar mission-oriented organizations, because it's time that we collaborate and not compete. We're all focused on the same goals for the same world. So I wanted to just share, as you're thinking about these strategies, I think the speaking piece in particular is really, really interesting. Thinking about what it is that you want to say to philanthropy, that you want to say to, people in economic development or community development, things that you want to say to the community around Again, just these spaces and places where we might not traditionally see our missions aligned or making statements, because it really does attract people for a variety of reasons, and it's great donor education. So one of our clients over the years has been this organization called Half the Story. This picture that you see here is of Larissa May Lars, who's the founder and executive director. And when she launched Half the Story, which is an organization focused on ensuring the digital well-being of young people in a time where young people are really struggling with their mental health. When she launched this organization on a very small budget, I don't even I think it was less than $100,000 when she started, probably about 10 years ago when I first met her. She really talked about how difficult it was to find new supporters. And especially new supporters at a time where funding mental health and mental wellness wasn't a top tier focus for a lot of folks. And so what she decided to do was craft several messages from her own story, and around, mobilizing around the movement of half the story, which is to share the other half of our story, and not just think that life is perfect because of what we see on social media and on our LinkedIn profiles, because it's not. Um, but to really think about what are those messages that I'm sharing with different audiences. And then literally Lars spent the first, I'd say 2 years launching this organization, going on a speaking tour and having something to say in front of every community that she was able to get the airtime to stand in front of. Um, Now, eight and a half, 9 years later, Lars's organization has a multi-million-dollar budget, is about to do a massive capital raise. She's been on the Today Show several times as a commentator, but all of that started because she was thinking about what are the messages per audience that I position. So I'm not just continuing to speak to my own people or speak just to the sector that I'm working in. This is something that's impacting society as a whole. And so how do I really think about getting in front of new and different audiences and building those bridges? So again, think about the intersectionality of your work. Think about the way you can build bridges to different constituents. I'm sure many of you on today's call, could probably come up with a couple of audiences, whether on a local level, or on a national level. You could start to position some messages in front of them and let them know how important it is to resource your work. All right. So just a couple more things as we move along is as you're thinking about recruiting, be really genuine with how you're targeting donors. Don't have, make sure that you're creating pathways where you're not surprising anyone by what you're asking for. I remember one time I was 22 years old. I was invited to a fundraising event. I sat down at the table and the first giving level on the pledge card to give was $1,000. And I was like, do you know what my student loans are that I just ended up with? Like, I don't think I'm going to be giving at that level. So I remember feeling like it was just like it was not the right message for the right audience, and I shouldn't have been invited in that room, right? And I'm not saying you're going to get it perfect every time, but really think about, again, if you're going to do one big event every year, maybe parceling out the money that it costs, the time that it costs, and the strategy that it costs to bring in new people through that activity across several smaller, more targeted events that really target the types of donors and the amounts of financial and social capital you want to bring in really strategically. I've also had major donors say to me that they've gone to events before and said, like, they know that our family owns all of the car dealerships in this area. Why did they invite us to something? And then the solicitation at the end was a QR code to become a $20 monthly donor, right? So be really aware of people's socioeconomic conditions and what's possible across these different constituencies. So first up, I'm giving you some examples here based on what I'm seeing trend this year. This is some of what we're advising clients. We're living in a vast time of income inequality. If you've come to any of my webinars with Bonterra, that's something I always name because I feel like it's really important. We are seeing people who ultra high net worth and high net worth folks who are talking to us about 6 and 7 figure gifts when maybe they were giving 5 and 6 figure gifts before. And then on the flip side, excuse me, we're seeing individuals that used to give the $100, $200, $300 to the year-end appeal letter giving $5 and $10 a month because they need to budget their philanthropy. And again, because the working class and middle class are struggling. So think about your monthly donor program, those monthly sustainers. It's really good for this type of program to equate it to a specific need and then have consistent follow-up communications. So you'll see here on all 4 bullet points I put together: follow up, communicate, let them know what they're funding, how it's helping you. Again, this is some of the awesome functions of the technology that you can choose, is to think about how you can sort of set those messages and sort of set it and forget it. So I know Bonterra across many of their platforms has the capacity for you to set communications, to make quick little videos, things like that. That makes a big difference. I recently got a short video from the ED that said, hey, monthly donor, like, you're in a community of over 80, I think it was 80, you're in a community of 82 monthly donors we have now, and together you're helping us fund X. Those types of messages are really important for this type of community, because I obviously know you're not going to change the world on my $5 a month. But if I know I'm in a community of almost 100 people doing that, that actually feels a little bit more realistic. The next up is corporate donors. So again, really thinking about, are you offering value to the company? And also, are you helping enhance their employee experience? So a lot of companies that we're working with right now, they're struggling, like many of us are in our own nonprofits, to recruit and retain employees. It's a tough hiring landscape. So that being said, be really genuine and say, hey, what are some of the struggles that you're having as a company? What are some of the things you want to have an impact around in the community? How could we unite all of that together to be successful partners in this community? Don't just approach them with your one pager already created around a tree planting Earth Day, if that's not the activity that they're going to want to do with you. Next up is major donors. So again, however your organization defines this, high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals, or maybe of a smaller program and it's more upper middle class folks giving $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 a year. Really think about how you're helping them connect their family and legacy to your impact and your outcomes as an organization. An organization that I love here in Maine, the Wild Seed Project. My family and I are slightly bigger donors to that organization over the course of every year, because one of the conversations they foster with us frequently is how we're helping raise our children to be great stewards of the land here in our state of Maine. So again, those small little communications and the one phone call a year I get from a board member really make me feel like it makes a difference, that I'm not only paying attention to the work they're doing for my kids being raised on this land, but also that it makes a difference that I'm not a $10 donor and that I stretch to give much more. And then lastly, you might not always think of them as donors, but we do have a commitment to our board members and volunteers to steward them as the donors and supporters that they are within the organization. I think it's always really important to be realistic and to also keep them inspired and follow up. So a couple of years ago, we had an organization we worked with. They had a huge volunteer base. I think like over 1,200 volunteers across their program. They had 2 people that basically they were hired to manage the volunteers to do the elements of the program all throughout New England. And what shocked me was they never solicited those volunteers. They never asked them for financial support. So one of the things that we did with this particular organization was we sort of said, hey, if you're trying to recruit and bring in new donors, you've got 1,200 people here who love the mission. If all of them became $5 monthly donors, or all of them gave 25 bucks once a year, that's a big group and community, and you're not asking them right now. So think about how to keep your board members and volunteers inspired. One of the things I hear a lot from board members is they stop giving, or they get frustrated at the give get because they don't feel inspired, connected to the mission themselves, or really stewarded in their board role effectively. They join your 4 to 6 meetings a year, they go through the agenda, they get asked to send out the year-end appeal letter, and then, they shake hands with a couple people at your annual event. Really think about an individual approach for board members and volunteers and stewardship around them as well, because they could be, again, bigger, larger donors and more passionate about recruitment if they feel inspired and connected to your work. All right, 6 more minutes, then I think I'm going to open it up to Q&A. But if you're writing your development plan for this year, if you haven't already, or it's kind of in motion, or if you're on a fiscal year and you're starting in July or September and think about your next fundraising plan, just a couple things again to root in your plan. One is that abundance piece. So abundance and authenticity must reign in our fundraising plans and in our budgets. Talk about the real needs of your organization. You cannot bring in 500 monthly sustainers with 1.5 staff. But if you see the trajectory to get there over the next 3 years, and it means bringing in one person part-time at $30,000 or $35,000 a year to build that base, talk about and name those real needs in your fundraising plan and map them out. So I guess that's just one thing to think about, is like the real needs of the organization. The next thing is, as an organization, maybe think about your stance on philanthropy. How do you feel about philanthropy and the way in which you're resourced? Are there things that you want to share and say about government grants and partnerships, foundation and institutional partners, grant making? I had an organization about 2 years ago that I advised. They lost a third of their budget when a grant maker decided not to fulfill the last year of a multi-year grant, and it put them in a huge deficit and position. And they were kind of hesitant about it, but I advised them to share that in a newsletter to their community, not name the entity, but they wrote a newsletter and they sent it out. And then they had a couple calls with some of their other supporters and said, here's what isn't working for us in philanthropy and what makes it so fragile when we're literally just trying to feed and house people in this region. Um, and immediately from that, there were 2 donors that we didn't even know had the financial capacity that reached out and said, we love your work. We recently kind of came to know it. What do you need? And so all these new donors kind of came out of the woodwork from that process. And so I think it's really important that you speak about how difficult, and also how wonderful when we have those great moments. The next newsletter was like, oh my gosh, these champions that stepped up, right? So you're kind of always sharing, some of that as well around the ecosystem that you're in, how your work is resourced, and what it allows you to actually do to fulfill mission and take care of your people. Don't be afraid in your broader fundraising plan to talk about long-term vision and finances. So again, we're in this moment of income inequality. I have had donors reach out to me and say, hey, I know we gave $250,000 to that capital campaign. If we were to give you a million over 2 years, what would you do with that? So don't be afraid to start to pepper into some of your fundraising plans, that wish list or that dream state. You might want to have a strategy in tandem to your other strategies where you're talking about the desire for a reserve fund or an endowment. Again, with this generational wealth transfer, we just never quite know when and how certain families or entities are going to be able to make it rain, so to speak, for our organizations. So just be prepared and know from an abundance lens what you would do with that big money, as much as you're working towards your sort of quarterly or your annual benchmarks. Let your volunteers know what is most helpful. So again, this is where I've seen strong volunteer bases that I've said, hey, like we have a captive audience, like could you also start to support fundraising, or could you mobilize other volunteers to fundraise? If you have a lot of people giving their time and talents, don't be afraid to enlist them to start to give their treasure and their ties. And what I mean by that is their money and their friends, family, colleagues, and networks. And yeah, the last piece is, really thinking your fundraising plan about the stories that you're telling to connect with folks. So again, I don't connect to some of the narratives from environmental groups in our area because I'm not an environmentalist. I'm not an academic. I'm a mom raising 2, almost 3 kids in a state where I want to make sure they have a vibrant, beautiful landscape to live in and grow food on and all of that. Think about the stories that connect to the people actually opening your newsletter. I tend to find a lot of folks use a lot of jargon. There's a lot of over intellectualizing what you do. And I'm like, I have no clue. I never read that research report. I didn't go to school for that. So just really think about telling more stories that connect with folks. And also it's a busy, noisy landscape this year, but also just in general. So bullet points, short videos, some of those digital storytelling ideas. One of my favorite newsletters comes from an organization called Embrace Race. They help parents to navigate complex conversations around race with their children. And I love it because when the newsletter comes out, it's literally just like a handful of bullet points and a couple of tips, and then a donate button at the bottom. So think about telling stories and sharing resources that connect with folks where they're at. Think about it as yourself. You're sitting at your desk in the morning, about to start the workday with a cup of tea, and you have 3 minutes to glance at what's in your inbox and newsletters before you delete them or move them to spam, right? So just something to think about. Make sure that you're really connecting with folks. So I made you a short-term action plan for springtime before I head off onto maternity leave and walking my baby in a stroller. And I'm actually thinking about some of this for some of our clients too. Like, what can you really do in the next couple of months to set the stage for success between now and the end of the year? Knowing that the end of the year might be really tricky. I would say don't put a lot of uh, hope into big gifts coming in November and December if you haven't already had conversations about them between now and September. I would really front load a lot of your big giving conversations so you're not as vulnerable going into the fall. The first is make a budget for all these activities. You can't do all of these events and activities that I'm suggesting today without at least knowing that you have $500 from your board chair to play with. Maybe they'll cut an extra check this year. Or knowing that you can put $5,000 in the budget and you've confirmed it with your executive director. So just make sure you have a budget, because doing this and kind of not planning around how much you actually have to spend is really difficult. The second is be really confident in your authentic voice and identity. If you're going to get into some of the more political or philanthropic conversations, as I've suggested today, again, as it makes sense to your organization, make sure you're confident in it and that everyone has sort of approved it in a certain capacity. You never want to go rogue or not have everyone feel part of a process around figuring out what that is and what those messages are. I would say right now, if you're a 1 to 3 person development shop, of the suggestions you heard from me today, maybe pick 3 to 5 new places to target for engagement. This new restaurant that just opened in town, this philanthropic conference in upstate New York, and this digital online community that I've started participating in around some of our mission work. Whatever those 3 audiences are going to be, start engaging there, and then think about what are the activities or offerings you could position in front of them that could then translate to solicitation and bringing in new donors. And then get ready to speak. Be really clear on what some of those messages might be for those audiences. If you're a development director or associate, attending today, that might be something also to approve by your ED. Hey, I want to speak in front of more audiences of women donors this year. Is it okay if I contact these 3 affinity groups at HubSpot, State Street, and Bank of America, and see if I can head on in and have a conversation with those target audiences around these 3 bullet points or these 3 ideas that I've learned from doing this work. And then lastly is, be consistent. So the other thing that's really important is people try new things, and you need to try it out for at least 3 years or at least 3 times to see it really start to come to fruition. So one of the mistakes I've seen organizations make since 2020 is basically trying a new thing every year and not just being consistent with, we're at least going to set it and forget it for 2 or 3 years and then measure if it's working or not. And obviously, if you do something and it's a complete fail, you don't want to repeat it. But if there's some good nuggets within it, keep massaging it into another iteration and try it for 3 years and then really get a sense of, okay, like this monthly sustainer program is growing, so let's keep growing it. Or going to these women's affinity groups is working. Every time we get at least 1 to 3 new major donors, let's keep going. So again, to go back to half the story and the example around Lars's work, I think that's where, again, Lars, after a year or 2 of that speaking tour, really knew the audiences where she was going to position her message to get funding. So it takes time, create that, learning culture and environment, embrace that growth mindset, and, you'll be well on your way. So I'm going to turn to Amanda to help me out with Q&A and fielding some of your questions today. Thank you all for participating and listening and being a part of this presentation. I invite you to head to our website to sign up for our newsletter. And on June 26th, I'll be 2 days back from parental leave. On June 26th, we're doing a free webinar. We do a free webinar every quarter. And that one's going to be focused on donor advised fund holders and how to attract them through your summer and fall activities. So please do be in touch. And if you're interested in anything beyond today, tools, templates, resources I can share, send me an email and I'll do my best to get back to you before, hopefully not, but before my water breaks, so to speak.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alyssa. And I just popped a poll up on the screen for folks to fill out if you are interested in getting on that newsletter or getting additional resources from Alyssa. As you learned from today, she is a wealth of knowledge here and has so much to share and so many great resources. And a lot of people said this was a super informative presentation, and I promise you this is just the tip of the iceberg with Alyssa. So definitely follow up, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. One of the questions that I saw come in is we have a few new significant donors in the last 6 months. And I was wondering when the right time is to ask them for referrals to their network. When is it too soon? When is it appropriate to kind of tap into those resources?
Oh, sorry, Amanda, you broke up a little bit, and I'm in the
Oh,
queue. What was the?
so can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can. There you go.
Cool.
Sorry.
So this was, yeah, no worries. This was a question of somebody saying in the last 6 months they've gained some significant new donors, and they're wondering when the right time to ask for a referral is and when it's too soon to ask to tap into their networks.
Yeah. So, I think it depends. I mean, I hate to say this, right? But like, I think it depends a little bit on the individual approach, right? So, in the individual, I know people who right up front are like, oh my gosh, I love this work. Like, I'm happy to cut a check. And then how about we do a house party in the summer? Like, they'll offer that information to you. I think it's always okay to have a really good menu of options or a blanketed response. Once someone gives a gift, I think it's very natural in the gratitude moment to say, how about we stay in touch? And in the next couple of weeks, if you're interested in helping us build off of your gift and expand our network, I'd love to talk. I think that's fine. I think it's how you frame it. I think if you immediately have someone give a gift and go back to them and be like, you got 5 other friends that can give 5K, that'd be great. Like that's not great. It's so salesy, right? It's like buy more vacuums. I think that that can come across as really sort of uncomfortable. So my
Mhm.
suggestion would be wait a couple weeks out from when they gave their gift. But if they were engaged and excited and really, about being a donor, I wouldn't delay for too long from saying, hey, like, would you like to help us mobilize more people around this? And, remember, you want a good 3-month runway to plan a house party or to write them a letter or something like that to gather and gain new supporters.
Yeah.
So even if you ask, like, say someone just gave today, you ask them at the end of April, early May, if they want to help you with fundraising for the rest of the year, and then you finally meet with them in June to discuss it, they're probably not planning something until September or October.
Yeah.
So just something to think about is that timing.
Yeah, that's a great point. I feel like the it depends happens all the time, but like it truly does, and
Yeah.
having that context is important. I saw a couple of folks, Alyssa, just for me, ask kind of ways to capture new donor information and wondering that. And so I did want to just say if anyone is looking to kind of upgrade into tools that capture that information and allow you to follow up with new donors, that's what we do here at Bonterra with many of our tools. So I'll just leave a poll up really quickly for folks to fill out while we get to the next question, if that is something you're looking for. And so next one that came in, this was from Kristen, saying that they've got kind of a specific need, a dollar amount in mind that they have to raise before the fall. And they were able to find what philanthropists in their community have funded larger organizations.
Yep.
And they want to know what's the best way to approach them with their ask if they haven't connected with them previously. So, kind of that cold call, but knowing these people have similar interests.
So I'm going to say two pathways. And again, I don't know the particular humans and dynamics, so I'm always mindful of that. One pathway is I actually, a lot of the leads that I get for similar work in similar issue areas come from other development directors. I feel like the next generation of development directors and even EDs that I'm working with aren't super territorial around or competitive with their donor base. So when I've written to someone and said, hey, I know Kennebunk Savings Bank is funding the majority of support for people in recovery in the community, could you introduce me to whoever the community manager liaison is? I'd like to talk to them about our work. I have never had anybody come back from that and say no, because they know I'm like totally aligned with this work. We all want more money going
Mhm.
to movement. Like, of course, I'll introduce you to Sarah, Alyssa. Like, you guys can have a conversation. They don't feel threatened by other organizations asking because they know that Kennebunk Savings Bank wants to know everyone else in the ecosystem and wants to keep funding this
Yeah.
space. So there's that one component of it is you could do that type of build that kind of bridge. The second is, I have very often given donors who are prominent in the community the opportunity to come and speak or share. Prominent philanthropists in the area, you might want to extend an invitation to them and say, hey, I've noticed that you're very philanthropic in our community. On International Philanthropy Day in November, we're hosting a panel. Would you be a panelist? Right? So I've kind of, it's like a little bit of that, like ask for advice and you get access to the capital. But it's actually saying like, I'm happy to give you a platform because I know how great a philanthropist and how passionate you are about philanthropy.
Mhm.
On Earth Day, you've given to so many environmental groups here. Would you join our panel on Earth Day? It's a great way to build a bridge, and it's so nice to kind of have that, I don't know, just really create again, like more of an ecosystem around issues in an area. And if people love where they are and what they're the work that they're doing, they usually want to know about other organizations in the space.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great
It's
point.
up. We all know.
Everyone knows.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a great point, Alyssa. I do want to be mindful of time. We're at time here, and I know you've got a super busy schedule, but there was one more question I think was a good pair off of the answer that you just gave. So if you don't mind doing one last follow-up. So some people were actually asking how they can find those trust-based philanthropy groups or like a philanthropy conference, giving circles, kind of ways to make those connections and kind of where they can go in their communities.
Yeah, so I don't know if my typing to the chat goes to everyone, but if you want to type in Amanda
Yeah.
Philanthropy Together, on Philanthropy Together's website, there's actually a global directory of giving circles that you could go reach out to, and you could either suggest to donors in your community to join, excuse me, and participate and get to know them like a board member could join one and get to know members. Um, or you could reach out to them and say, hey, you're in our community and you're funding issues surrounding women and girls. Could we come and speak on International Women's Day and tell you a little bit about what we're
Mhm.
doing? So I think Philanthropy Together is a great resource. They actually have a free summit coming up, the We Give Summit, which I believe is the first week of May. So again, you could participate in, I think to a certain point, there's the activities are free before you buy a ticket. Um, and then the other thing I would think about is just, again, asking your local community foundation, going to I go to every time I start working in a new region, I go to all the Fidelity, Schwab, Vanguard, Community Foundation, boutique investment finance firms. And I mean, I'm a grassroots organizer. Like I knock on the door, I got my little pin on, and I very assertively and lovingly and annoyingly, um, go and say, hey, like, we're doing work in the community surrounding X. And I'm curious, like, what are you all focused on? And
Mhm.
where do you attend events? What conferences are you going to? I'm trying to learn more about people who care about climate change and sustainability, how they intersect with investment and finance worlds, and where should I go? So
Yeah.
I think that, that type of piece also too can be really important to think about.
Yeah,
Look
that's
forward.
great advice.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, Alyssa. There are tons of thank yous rolling into the chat and congratulations at the same time.
very
People are
kind.
saying that this was
Thank you
such
all.
great information, super helpful, and really, has folks excited for kind of what they can do and, level setting the expectations for this year and really growing on that and using that as well. So thank you so much to everyone who was here and participated and engaged with us. Alyssa, always a pleasure. Thank you so much. Congratulations and good luck with baby number 3. And I will chat with you in June when you are back, but always a pleasure. Definitely get in touch with Alyssa and follow Right Collective. It's an amazing, amazing group of folks. So appreciate you all and hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday. Take care.